Hey Afar, I'm Tiana Attride, and I'm here in beautiful, sunny Charleston, South Carolina.
Charleston may look postcard perfect, but just beneath the surface, there are buried secrets, century-old legends, and stories you won't find on your average city guide. From pirate blockades to haunted graveyards and alleys where people once dueled to the death, here are 10 things you never knew about Charleston, South Carolina. In the early 1700s, Charleston was a full-blown pirate hotspot. At the time, more than 2,000 pirates roamed the nearby seas during the golden age of piracy. This was right as Charleston was becoming one of the richest cities in colonial America thanks to enslaved labor and exports of rice and indigo, and that wealth made it a prime target. In 1718, infamous pirate Blackbeard famously held the city hostage until local leaders gave in to his demands for supplies. And his short-lived partner, the so-called gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet, was eventually captured, jailed, and hanged near the spot that's now home to the Old Exchange and the infamous Provost Dungeon. It was here that prisoners of war, enslaved people, and accused criminals were shackled and held, and you can still visit to this day. But Charleston's dungeon isn't the only place with an eerie past. In fact, this is one of the most haunted cities in the U.S. I met up with local guide Jack Kelly from Bulldog Tours to explore some of the city's most chilling ghost stories. One of the scariest, according to legend, a woman named Emily Dickerson was accused of witchcraft in the 1700s, burned at the stake, and had her ashes buried outside town in a sealed cask. Before she died, she vowed to do to Charleston what Charleston had done to her. Over a century later, her ghost allegedly appeared in a dream to a soldier working at the city's powder magazine. She asked him to dig up her cask and said not to open it until she told him to do so. Not long after, the soldier opened it early out of curiosity, and as he did, a fire suddenly tore through the city. That fire, allegedly, the Great Fire of 1861. There is no official record of any of it, but some say the witch's cask is still buried at the powder magazine to this day. Bulldog is also the only tour company in town with after-hours access to the circular Congregational Church graveyard, one of the oldest in America, with headstones carved before the United States was even technically a country. The site is full of ghost stories. Some say a woman in blue robes, covered in dirt, haunts the cemetery to this day, mourning the loss of her children. Let's just say that this host did not stick around long enough to find out. Now, there are two kinds of spirits in this city, the kind that haunt you and the kind you drink. In fact, Charleston is home to the oldest liquor store in the United States. Tavern Wine and Spirits has been operating on Broad Street since 1686, over 300 years. You can still buy a bottle there today. While I was in town, I picked up a sample for myself, a special whiskey made of Jimmy Red corn, a Native American heirloom corn that almost went extinct and was revived by local seed savers in the early 2000s. After a dark few centuries, Charleston's reputation needed a facelift by the early 1900s. To attract tourists, the city came up with the nickname the Holy City, a nod to the dozens of churches in town and a way to soften its image. But that's not the city's most famous marketing stunt. In the 1930s, Susan Pringle Frost, founder of the Preservation Society of Charleston, painted her house on East Bay Street pink in the style of a Caribbean home. The rest of the street followed suit, painting their houses in colorful shades, and soon the entire block was pastel, creating the city's iconic Rainbow Row. It was National Geographic that gave the row its famous name in the 1980s. At the time, photos were printed in black and white, so the magazine coined the name Rainbow Row to describe the vibrant street and get people excited to see it themselves. And speaking of the Preservation Society, Charleston's zoning laws are famously strict, meaning the city isn't just old, it's protected like a living museum. It became home to the first historic preservation district in the United States in 1931, decades before most cities even thought about protecting their old buildings. Today, its old and historic district is one of the biggest in the country, with more than 1,400 protected landmarks packed into just a few square miles. While you're walking around, be sure to keep an eye out for these little plaques with pineapples or shields on them. They mark buildings that have won awards for how well preserved they are. But there's another piece of hidden history hiding on Charleston's buildings, and for that, we're headed to Trad Street. This charming little lane once stretched all the way to the harbor and was lined with businesses catering to people arriving by sea. If you look closely at some of the older buildings, you'll spot shapes carved into the wooden shutters. Back then, many people were still unable to read, so buildings used these symbols instead of signs to tell people what each business offered. A crescent moon often signified a place to sleep, a tankard meant a tavern, and a heart pointed to a brothel. They don't just look cute, they had serious utility. Just a few blocks away from Trad Street, you'll probably notice this bubblegum pink Gothic church. It's pretty hard to miss. This is the French Huguenot church, first built in the 1840s by French Protestants who fled Catholic persecution in Europe. For a long time, it had a white facade. But during a 2013 restoration, conservators stripped away layers of paint and discovered that the original color was actually this bright pink. The color comes in part from traditional Charleston limestone paint, often made with crushed oyster shells and natural pigments, which give many coastal buildings their signature pastel tones. Charleston's most interesting streets might be the ones just wide enough to squeeze through, so don't skip the city's hidden alleys. Take Philadelphia Alley, once known as Jeweler's Alley, where men would meet at dawn to settle scores and fight to the death. There's also Longitude Lane, which, despite its name, runs east to west. It honors John Harrison, the man who figured out how to measure longitude at sea, helping sailors avoid getting lost. He won over £20,000 from British Parliament for his discovery, which would be worth roughly £4 million or 5.2 million USD today. And speaking of latitude, look for jasmine and other Asian plants spilling over the walls around town. Charleston shares a subtropical latitude with parts of China and India, so similar plants thrive here. You've probably sung Kumbaya around a campfire, but did you know that the song actually comes from the islands just off of Charleston? The Sea Islands are home to the Gullah, descendants of West Africans enslaved in the Low Country, who have preserved their heritage for centuries. Their dialect blends African languages with English, and while the exact origin of Kumbaya isn't known, it's believed to have been created by this community as a spiritual plea. What they're singing, Kumbaya, my lord, is come by here, my lord. But the Gullah influence on music didn't end there, and in fact, they influenced one of the great American operas. In 1925, Charleston-born author DuBose Hayward wrote a novel called Porgy, inspired by the Gullah community who lived just down the street from his childhood home in a place once known as Cabbage Row. 10 years later, it debuted on Broadway as George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, considered the first great American opera. The opera used Gullah rhythms, dialect, and stories, blending classical music with a uniquely Southern sound in a way that was controversial but groundbreaking, and it all started here. Whether you're planning your first trip to Charleston or you've been visiting for years, there's probably a hidden side of this city you haven't seen quite yet. Let us know down below which spot on this list surprised you most, or if there are any we missed. And if you like this video, of course, don't forget to subscribe. Happy travels, and we'll catch you next time.